Marry me before sunset or by morning, I lose everything. Clara Whitfield had walked 40 miles in 3 days looking for honest work. What she found was a sunburned cowboy holding a legal notice in one hand and her future in the other. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She stood in the dirt and stared at a man she'd never met and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. If this story already has you hooked, subscribe to our channel and follow every twist to the very end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Clara Whitfield had not eaten in 2 days when she stepped off the supply wagon that dropped her at the edge of Red Hollow, Texas. She didn't ask for help getting down. She didn't wait for the driver to offer a hand. She climbed over the wooden side rail herself, landed in the dust with both feet, straightened her back, and picked up her suitcase before them and even had the chance to look back at her. That was how Clara had lived the last 8 months. Quietly, without asking, without letting anyone see how close she was to the edge. Red Hollow was not a beautiful town. It was the kind of place the railroad forgot and the river bypassed, a collection of sun-beaten buildings, pressed against flat, dry land that seemed to stretch all the way to the end of the world. The main street was unpaved. The general store had a broken front step. 2 horses stood tied outside the saloon at 10 in the morning, and nobody seemed to think that was unusual. Clara had been to worse places, or at least, she told herself that. She reached into the front pocket of her coat and pulled out the small newspaper clipping she had been carrying for 11 days. The edges were soft from handling. She had read it so many times the ink was beginning to fade in the creases. Wanted one capable woman for ranch household work. Must manage cooking, supply records, and basic correspondence. Steady wages. Private quarters. Inquire at Callahan Creek Ranch 4 miles east of Red Hollow. Ask for W. Callahan. Steady wages. That was the part that had stopped her breath the first time she read it. Not generous wages, not extraordinary wages. Steady. Clara understood the difference. Steady meant reliable. Steady meant it would be there next week and the week after. Steady meant she could breathe. She folded the clipping carefully and returned it to her pocket. She needed to find a horse or a ride heading east. 4 miles on foot in this heat was possible, but she wanted to arrive looking like a woman capable of the work, not like someone who had walked the length of Texas to beg for a position. She crossed the street toward the general store with her chin level and her steps measured. She had learned that trick early. When you looked like you were falling apart, people treated you like you were. When you moved like you had somewhere to be, they got out of your way. The store was cool inside, if only slightly. A heavy-set man stood behind the counter, sorting mail into wooden cubbies. He glanced at her the way men in small towns always glanced at a woman traveling alone, assessing, suspicious, briefly curious. "Morning," Clara said. "I'm looking for directions to Callahan Creek Ranch." "I understand it's east of town." The man behind the counter stopped sorting mail. He turned to look at her more fully now, and something in his expression shifted, not unkind, but cautious. "You looking for work?" he asked. "I am." He set a stack of envelopes down slowly. "Callahan's place is east, about 4 miles. Follow the main road until you see the junction, oak big tree, split trunk. Turn right there. You'll see the gate. Thank you." "Miss," he stopped her before she could turn. "You know much about Wyatt Callahan?" Clara met his eyes. "Only that he's advertising for help." The storekeeper nodded slowly, but he didn't look reassured. "He's a good man," he said, as if choosing his words carefully. "But there's trouble out that way. Has been for months. You just go in with your eyes open is all." Clara thanked him again and walked out before he could say anything more. She had not come all this way for warnings. The man who gave her a ride east in his hay wagon didn't speak much, which Clara appreciated. He dropped her at the junction oak without fanfare, pointed toward the gate, and continued on his way. Clara stood for a moment with her suitcase at her feet, looking at what she could see of the property beyond the wooden gate. What she saw was work, not neglect or not entirely. Someone had been maintaining this land, but barely. The fence line needed repair in 2 places she could already identify from the gate. A water trough near the barn was listing to one side. But the land itself was real. The cattle in the far pasture looked healthy. The grass was dry but not dead. Someone had been fighting to keep this place standing. She pushed through the gate and walked up the main path toward the house. She had not gone 20 yards when a dog appeared, large, tawny, moving fast from the left side of the barn. Clara stopped walking, set her bag down, and held very still. The dog pulled up short 6 feet in front of her, planted his feet, and stared. Clara looked at him steadily. "We're going to be friends," she said quietly. "I'd just like to do it without either of us bleeding." The dog stared at her for another 5 full seconds. Then his tail moved once. "Good," Clara said. She picked up her bag and kept walking. The dog fell into step beside her. The house was 2 stories, wooden, solid in its bones, even if the porch railing needed replacing, and the paint had given up somewhere around 1,875. Clara climbed the porch steps, raised her hand to knock on the front door, and stopped. The door was open, not fully open, a few inches, and through those few inches she could hear 2 men's voices, and the tone of them made her hand drop before she could knock. "Final notice, Callahan. That's what it's. The county land office is sending an inspector in 18 days. "I know what it says." The second voice was quieter. "Controlled. But under that control was something stretched very tight. "I can read. Then you understand what happens if the inspection doesn't go your way. If they rule that the ranch is undermanaged, undermaintained, and operating without proper household establishment." "I understand perfectly. Benjamin Crow has 3 men at the land office who will testify that this property has been functionally abandoned since your father's death. If they make that case, the provisional title reverts. Crow files his competing claim within 48 hours, and you will have no legal standing to contest." I said, "I understand." A long silence. "Wyatt." The first voice dropped lower. "I'm your lawyer. I'm telling you this as your lawyer, but also as a man who knew your father. The one concrete way the inspector's report can work in your favor is if this ranch demonstrates a established household operation. A working home. I know what it means, Martin." Another silence. 18 days, the lawyer said. "That's all you have." Clara stepped back from the door. Quietly, she pressed against the porch railing and waited while footsteps crossed the inside floor. The door opened fully, and a man in a dark coat, carrying a leather satchel, came out. He was somewhere in his 50s, with a neat gray mustache and the look of someone who delivered bad news professionally. He saw Clara and stopped. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Clara returned. He looked at her bag, at her travel-worn coat, at the newspaper clipping she was holding in her hand because she'd pulled it out again without realizing. Then he nodded once, tipped his hat, walked down the porch steps, and kept going. Clara stood where she was. After a moment, she knocked on the open door. "It's open," said the quiet, controlled voice from inside. She pushed the door the rest of the way and stepped through. Wyatt Callahan was standing at a table covered in papers, with his back half turned to the door. He was taller than she expected, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of build that came from actual work rather than show. His dark hair was longer than was fashionable, and he hadn't shaved in at least 3 days. He had one paper in his hand and was reading it with the fixed attention of a man who already knew it was bad news but was looking for the line where it got worse. He turned when she stepped in, and Clara met his eyes for the first time. They were gray, tired, directly focused, the kind of eyes that didn't slide past people, but landed on them squarely and stayed. "Mr. Callahan," she said. "My name is Clara Whitfield. I'm here about the advertisement." He looked at her for a moment without speaking. His gaze moved briefly to her bag, to her coat, to her face, not the way the storekeepers had, assessing and suspicious. More like he was trying to determine something specific. "You came from town," he said. "I did. I rode out with a farmer heading this way." "How long have you been traveling?" 11 days from Fort Worth." Something crossed his expression. "You came 11 days for this position?" "I came 11 days for steady wages," Clara said. That was what the advertisement offered. He studied her for another moment. Then he set the paper down on the table, pulled out the chair across from it, and gestured for her to sit. Clara sat. She set her bag beside the chair and folded her hands in her lap and waited. Wyatt Callahan did not sit. He moved to the window, first looked out at the yard at whatever when he needed to think, and then turned back and looked at her again. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I need to be honest with you about something before we go any further." "That would be appreciated," Clara said. "The advertisement I placed was genuine. The work I described is real. This ranch needs someone who can manage the household records, organize the supply accounts, handle correspondence, and maintain the house. All of that is true, but—" He paused. "But the position I actually need filled is not exactly what I advertised." Clara kept her expression neutral. "What is the position you actually need filled?" Wyatt crossed his arms. He looked for just a moment like a man who had rehearsed this conversation in his head and was now finding that the real version was harder than the imagined one. "My ranch is under threat," he said. "You may have heard some of that conversation before you knocked." Clara didn't pretend she hadn't. "I heard enough to understand there's a land inspection in 18 days. "Yes." He moved to the table and picked up one of the papers, a legal document, dense with official language. "My father built this ranch 30 years ago. When he died, the title transferred to me, but the transfer left a proviso, a conditional clause that a powerful man in this county has been using to push a competing claim. Benjamin Crow has wanted this land for 15 years. He waited for my father to die, then he started working the legal system to take it. And the inspection," Clara said carefully, "is the moment he's been waiting for. The inspector will evaluate whether this property meets the county standard for an actively maintained ranch household. If he rules that it doesn't, and Crow has a position, to make that case the provisional title collapses. Crow files his competing claim within 48 hours. I lose everything my family built." Clara was quiet for a moment. "And where does my employment fit into this?" she asked. Wyatt set the paper down. He looked at her directly, and she could see that the next words were ones he had decided on, chosen carefully, but that didn't make them easy. "The inspector's standard for an established household," he said, "includes evidence of a functioning family operation. A single man on a ranch, no matter how well he maintains the land, does not meet that standard under the current county interpretation. A household, in the inspector's terms, means a wife," Clara said. The word landed flat between them. Wyatt didn't flinch from it. "Yes," he said. Clara looked at him for a long time. She was aware of several things happening in her chest, simultaneously, a sudden cold clarity that she recognized as danger, something else she couldn't name yet, and underneath both of those, a strange and painful understanding that this man was not asking her carelessly. "You're not offering me a job," she said. "I'm offering you a choice," he said. "Which is not the same thing. You're asking me to marry you." Clara kept her voice level. "You are asking a woman you met 4 minutes ago to marry you." "I'm asking a woman who traveled 11 days for honest work if she would consider an arrangement that is also honest," Wyatt said. "The marriage would be legal. Your wages would be paid. You would have private quarters, full use of the house, and a voice in how this property is managed. If the inspection goes our way and the title is secured, we revisit the arrangement in 6 months on whatever terms work for both of us. And if the inspection doesn't go our way, then we're both in the same position and you'll have lost nothing but 6 months and gained a wage." Clara stood up from the chair. She walked to the window he had been standing at and looked out at the yard, at the dog lying in the sun near the barn, at the fence line that needed work, at the cattle grazing in the far pasture. "This is the most extraordinary thing anyone has ever said to me," she said quietly. "I know that," Wyatt said. "You don't know anything about me. I know you traveled 11 days alone. I know you stepped back from that door when you heard trouble and didn't run. I know you walked past my dog without flinching." He paused. "And I know you're still standing in this room." Clara turned to look at him. "What if I say no?" she said. "Then I thank you for coming," Wyatt said. "And I help you find other work in town." She watched his face. There was no manipulation in it, no performance. He was a man standing in the wreckage of a plan and speaking plainly about it because he didn't know how to do anything else. I need to think, Clara said. The sun sets at 7:40, Wyatt said. That's the last moment I can reach the county registrar before they close. After that, the window is gone. Clara looked at him. You're serious, she said. Marry me before sunset. I need an answer by 7, he said. I won't hold you past that. She walked. Clara took her bag and walked out of the house and down to the far end of the ranch property, as far as she could go before the fence line stopped her. The dog came with her. She didn't try to send him back. She sat on the bottom rail of the fence and looked out at the land, and she thought. She thought about Fort Worth, about the letter she had received 6 months ago from the bank, formal language. Polite and devastating, explaining that the outstanding debts of Whitfield and Sons, dry goods, had been settled through liquidation of all business assets and the family home. That her father's business, her family's business, the thing she had worked in since she was 12 years old, was gone. Not bankrupt in the gradual sense, erased. She thought about the month after that when she had tried to find work in Fort Worth. How every merchant who had ever smiled at her across counter suddenly couldn't quite meet her eyes. How the word had gone around quietly, politely, in the invisible way that small communities communicate disaster, that Clara Whitfield was the daughter of a failed man. How a woman whose family had failed was, by some logic she had never agreed to, herself a failure. She had tried 3 towns after Fort Worth. She had worked briefly as a seamstress in one, a cook's assistant in another. Neither lasted more than a month. Not because she wasn't capable. She was capable of almost anything she set her mind to, but because capability, she had learned, was not the thing people were looking for. They were looking for safety. They were looking for women whose pasts were uncomplicated and whose futures were predictable. Clara was neither. Then she had found the advertisement. She pulled it out again now and looked at it in the afternoon light. Steady wages. Private quarters. She had thought she was coming to work. She had walked into something she didn't have a word for yet. The dog put his head on her knee. Clara looked down at him. His brown eyes were very calm. What would you do? She asked. He blinked at her, not helpfully. Clara folded the clipping one more time and put it away. She thought about Wyatt Callahan's face when she'd asked what happened if she said no. Then I thank you for coming. No pressure. No manipulation. No performance of desperation designed to make her feel responsible for his situation. He'd laid out the truth, and then almost incongruously, for a man with 18 days to lose everything he had given her the door. She thought about the sound of his voice when he'd said, I know what it means, Martin. The way he'd said it. Controlled. But the control of a person who has been holding something tight for a very long time and is getting tired. She thought about the land she'd walked through to reach the back fence. It wasn't beautiful, but it was real. Someone had put 30 years of labor into this ground. Someone had built this fence, post by post, and dug this water trough, and planted those trees, and done it all believing it would still be here in 30 more years. And one man with more money and more political connections than was fair was trying to take it. Clara stood up from the fence, brushed the dust off her skirt. The dog lifted his head. Come on, she said. She walked back. Wyatt was in the barn when she returned. Not hiding, working. He was repairing a section of harness with the focused attention of someone who didn't know how to be still. He heard her footsteps and looked up. Clara stopped in the barn doorway. I have conditions, she said. Something in his posture changed, barely visible, but she caught it. All right, he said. I am not your possession, Clara said. Not for 6 months, not for 6 minutes. If I agree to this, I am your partner in the arrangement. I have a voice in decisions that affect this property and this household. You do not dismiss my opinion because I am a woman. You do not make agreements on my behalf without discussing them with me first. Agreed, Wyatt said. He didn't hesitate. I will manage the household records and the supply accounts. That is genuine work, and I expect it to be treated as such. I am not decoration. I am not a prop for an inspection. I never asked you to be, he said. I am asking you to confirm it clearly. You are not a prop, Wyatt said. You are, if you agree to this, the person running this household. That is real work, and it will be treated as real work. Clara looked at him for a moment. Third condition. The private quarters are private. The arrangement we're entering is a legal one. It does not obligate either of us to anything beyond what we have explicitly agreed to. Understood, Wyatt said. His voice was entirely steady. And fourth, Clara said, if at any point I discover you have been dishonest with me about the situation, about the ranch, about anything that affects my involvement in this, the arrangement ends. Immediately, without negotiation, Wyatt set the harness down on the wooden rail. He looked at her with those gray, tired, direct eyes. I have not been dishonest with you, he said, and I won't be. Clara held his gaze. Then we have an agreement, she said. He nodded slowly. We need to leave for town in the next 20 minutes if we're going to reach the registrar, he said. I know, Clara said. I'll get my bag. The ride into Red Hollow was 25 minutes of near silence. Wyatt drove the wagon with the efficient economy of movement style of a man who had done it 10,000 times. Clara sat beside him with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the road ahead. The dog had tried to follow them and had been sent back twice before accepting it. Neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes. Then Clara said, How long has Crow been working this claim? Seriously, about 2 years, Wyatt said. He's been circling longer. But after my father died and the provisional clause became active, he moved fast. What's the provisional clause? Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Then, my grandfather originally settled the land in 1851. There was a competing survey claim at the time, another family, the Harpers, who said they'd settled it first. It went to county arbitration. My grandfather won, but the decision included a clause that said if the property ever showed signs of their words were abandonment or dereliction of household management within a generation, the Harper claim, or any subsequent claim based on it, could be refiled. And Crow bought the Harper claim. He bought whatever legal argument he could get his hands on, Wyatt said. Cost him practically nothing because everyone thought the clause was dormant. But he had a lawyer who found it and understood how to use it. Clara processed this, and the inspector who appointed him. County Land Office. There are 3 people on the inspection committee. Crow has influence over at least 2 of them. My lawyer believes the inspector himself is neutral, but neutral is only good if the evidence is overwhelmingly in my favor. So the goal, Clara said slowly, is to make the evidence so clear that even a neutral inspector, with political pressure from both sides, rules correctly. Yes, and a married household is the clearest possible evidence of established operation. Under the county standard, yes. Clara thought for a moment. What else? What else does the inspector evaluate besides household establishment? Wyatt glanced at her briefly. Livestock numbers and health. Boundary maintenance. Supply records and account history. Property improvements. The supply records and account history, are they in order? Not well organized, Wyatt admitted. I've been focused on the land and livestock. The paper side of things is where I start tomorrow, Clara said. He looked at her again. Longer this time, yes, he said. Red Hollow appeared ahead of them, low and dusty in the late afternoon light. The county registrar's office was on the east end of the main street, a small building with a government issue sign and a light still burning in the window. They arrived with 40 minutes to spare before closing. The registrar was a thin man named Grover, somewhere between 50 and 100 years old, with spectacles and the slightly startled expression of someone who had processed stranger transactions than this, but was surprised by each new one regardless. He looked at Clara. He looked at Wyatt. He looked at Clara again. You need a marriage license and registration, Wyatt said. Both, Grover said. He had not quite phrased it as a question. Today, Wyatt confirmed. Grover studied them for another moment. Clara met his eyes pleasantly and said nothing. He got out the papers. The process took 20 minutes. Clara signed where she was told to sign. Wyatt signed. Grover applied his seal with the practiced efficiency of a man who knew better than to editorialize. Two witnesses were found: a woman who worked in the land office and a man who had been waiting outside, and the document was completed. Grover handed them each a copy of the certificate. "Congratulations," he said, in the tone of a man completing a transaction. "Thank you," Clara said. They walked out of the registrar's office into the early evening. The sun was 40 minutes from the horizon, still burning orange and enormous over the flat Texas land. Clara looked at it. Then she looked down at the paper in her hand. Her name, Wyatt Callahan's name, today's date, the seal of Red Hollow County. She was married. She had come to Texas looking for steady wages. She was married to a cowboy she had met 4 hours ago. The thought had a kind of altitude to it, not dizzying, not exactly. More like standing at the edge of something very high and realizing the edge was real. "Clara," she turned. Wyatt was watching her. "You all right?" he asked. She folded the certificate carefully, tucked it into the front of her coat, next to the newspaper clipping. 2 documents, 11 days apart, both of them, in their way, pointing at the same place. "I'm all right," she said. "We should get back," he said. "There's still work to do before dark." She looked at him. At the tired gray eyes, and the straight back, and the hands that had spent the afternoon repairing harness and the morning reading legal notices, and had done both with the same complete attention. "There's always work to do," she said. He almost smiled. She saw it just at the corner of his mouth, just for a second before it was gone. "That's the job," he said. Clara nodded. "Then let's go home," she said. And she meant the ranch. She told herself she meant the ranch. But she walked to the wagon and climbed up without waiting for help, and Wyatt Callahan climbed up beside her, and they drove east out of Red Hollow as the sun went down behind them, and for the first time in 8 months. Clara Whitfield did not feel like a woman running from something. She felt quietly and dangerously, like a woman who had just walked toward something. Instead, the dog was waiting for them at the gate when they returned. He didn't bark. He simply stood there in the last gray light of the evening, watching the wagon come up the road, with the patience of an animal that had learned not to expect good news but had decided to wait anyway. When Clara climbed down from the wagon, he walked directly to her and pressed his head against her hand. "He doesn't do that," Wyatt said. Clara looked up. "Do what?" "Go to people." Wyatt was watching the dog with an expression she couldn't quite read. "He tolerates me. He's suspicious of everyone else." "He made his decision this afternoon," Clara said. She scratched behind the dog's ears and he closed his eyes. "What's his name?" "Ranger." "Ranger." She said it to the dog, not to Wyatt. The dog's tail moved. "That works." She picked up her bag and walked toward the house. She heard Wyatt behind her, leading the horse toward the barn, and for a moment there was only the sound of her own footsteps on dry ground, the creak of the barn door. The vast Texas quiet settling in around the property like something that had been waiting all day to come back. She pushed open the front door and stood in the entrance of the house that was, as of 40 minutes ago, legally her home. She looked at it properly for the first time. The main room was large, with a fireplace on the left wall and a long table to the right that was buried under stacks of paper. Ledgers, receipts, letters, documents folded and refolded and stacked without system. Along the far wall were shelves that had clearly once held in organized household jars, equipment, books, but somewhere in the last few years, the organization had broken down and been replaced by the particular kind of disorder happens when a person is working too hard in too many directions to manage everything at once. There was a staircase, 2 doors off the main room. A kitchen visible through one of them. It was not a neglected house. It was a house that had been kept alive by someone who was running out of hands. Clara set her bag down next to the table. She pulled out the chair closest to the paper stacks and sat down. She picked up the first ledger and opened it. The entries went back 4 years. The handwriting was Wyatt's, she could tell from the spare functional quality of it. Letters that communicated information without embellishment. Numbers, dates, amounts. But the system had gaps, months where entries stopped and then resumed without explanation. Supply purchases that weren't reconciled against income. A running account with the Red Hollow General Store that had 3 different ways of being recorded, depending on what year it was. So, Clara reached into her bag and found her own notebook. She opened it to the first blank page. She started making a list. She was still at the table when Wyatt came in from the barn. He stopped when he saw her. "You should eat," he said. "In a minute." She didn't look up. "When did the record-keeping system change?" Here she pointed to the ledger without turning around. "There's a break in April of 1880. Before that, the entries are organized by week. After, they're by transaction. It's not wrong, but it's inconsistent. It'll make the account history harder to present cleanly." Wyatt crossed to the table and looked at where she was pointing. He was quiet for a moment. "April of 1880, he said, "was when my father had his first bad spell. I took over the books." Clara stopped writing. She looked up at him then. "How long was he sick?" she asked. "About a year and a half before he passed," Wyatt said. "He tried to keep working as long as he could, but by the end I was running most of it." Clara looked back at the ledger. She understood now what she was seeing. Not disorganization, the record of a man learning how to do too many things at once while the person who'd taught him was dying. "I can standardize this," she said. "It'll take a few days, but I can create a presentation that reconciles everything back to a consistent system. The inspector will see a complete account history." Wyatt looked at her for a moment without speaking. "There's bread and cold meat in the kitchen," he said finally. "And I'll put coffee on." It wasn't a thank you. She understood it was meant to be. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Clara said, and went back to her list. They ate late, across the long kitchen table, with the ledger and Clara's notebook open between them because Clara had questions, and the 10 minutes she'd promised had somehow become another hour. Wyatt answered everything she asked: supply costs, livestock numbers, the name of the man at the land office who handled the county accounts, the history of the boundary surveys. He answered without impatience, and without trying to simplify things for her, which she noticed and filed away. "The inspector's name," Clara said. "What do you know about him?" "His name is Aldous Peake. He's been with the county land office 11 years. My lawyer says he's procedural, he follows the standard closely and doesn't deviate. Which means if we meet the standard, he'll certify it. But if there's a gap, he'll flag it. He'll flag it. And Crow's men will use the flag. Then we don't leave gaps." Clara made another note. "I want to walk the boundary line tomorrow. I need to see the fence condition firsthand, not just from what you've told me, because if the inspector evaluates the physical maintenance and there are gaps in the boundary, I want to know where they are before he does." Wyatt looked at her steadily. "You want to walk the full boundary?" "I do. It's about 6 miles. I walked 40 getting here," Clara said. 6 is fine." He was quiet again, with that quality of quiet she was beginning to recognize, not distance but attention. He looked at her the way a person looked at something they were recalibrating their understanding of. "All right," he said. Clara closed her notebook. She reached for her coffee cup, found it empty, and stood to refill it from the pot on the stove. When she turned back, Wyatt was watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "It's just you've been here 5 hours and you already know more about the state of those records than I do." Clara sat back down. "I grew up in a dry goods business," she said. "Account management and supply records were my responsibility from the time I was 15. My father ran the floor. I ran the books." "What happened to it?" he said. "The business." Clara was quiet for a moment. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. Outside, somewhere far off, something moved in the dark, an animal, a shift of wind. "Bad year," she said. "Then another bad year. Then a debt that compounded faster than we could manage it." She paused. "The bank moved when the economy turned. 2 weeks' notice and then it was done." "How long ago?" 8 months, I'm sorry," Wyatt said. The words were simple, and she believed them. "It was a good business," she said. "My father built it over 20 years. I watched him do it." She stopped. "I understand what it is to watch something your family built be taken apart." The silence between them after that was different from the one before. Less cautious, more honest. The bedroom, at the top of the stairs on the left, Wyatt said, was my sister's. She married 6 years ago and moved to San Antonio. The room's made up. It's yours, thank you, Clara said. I'm at the end of the hall on the right, he said. If you need anything in the night, you can knock. Though I should warn you, Ranger sleeps across the top of the stairs, so you'll hear him if something moves. Does something often move? Wyatt's expression shifted slightly. Crow's men have come to the property twice in the past 3 months. Nothing I could prove, nothing I could take to the sheriff. But there were cut fence posts in places that don't cut themselves, and one of my horses spooked in a way that doesn't happen without reason. Clara absorbed this carefully. He's not just working the legal angle. No, Wyatt said. He's making it harder to maintain the property, so that when the inspector comes, it looks like exactly what he's claiming it is. That's why the fence line matters, Clara said. That's why all of it matters, Wyatt said. Clara nodded slowly. She picked up her notebook again and wrote something at the top of a new page. Then she closed it. Get some rest, she said. We've got work in the morning. He looked at her for a moment, that same recalibrating look, and then he stood and cleared the cups from the table and said, Good night, Clara. It was the first time he'd used her given name. She noticed. She went upstairs, found the room at the top of the stairs on the left, and set her bag on the floor beside the narrow bed. She sat on the edge of the mattress. She took the marriage certificate out of her coat and looked at it again in the lamplight. Clara Whitfield, Wyatt Callahan, married this day. She set it on the small table beside the bed, lay down in her clothes, and was asleep in 3 minutes. She did not dream. For the first time in 8 months, she did not dream. She was at the table with the ledgers before dawn. By the time Wyatt came downstairs at first light, she had already sorted the papers into 4 categories, marked the gaps in the account history with small pieces of ribbon she'd found in her bag, and started a reconciliation chart in her notebook that tracked every supply purchase against the corresponding ranch income for the past 3 years. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her. Coffee, she said, without looking up. I made it about 20 minutes ago. It should still be good. He poured himself a cup. He stood for a moment looking at what she'd done to the table. The stacks had become piles. The piles had been given order. You've been up since when? He asked. 4, I think. Maybe a bit before. There are 18 days, she said. I'll sleep when we have more of them. He didn't argue. That was one thing she was learning about Wyatt Callahan. He did not argue with logic. He might push back, he might question, but he didn't waste breath on arguments he wasn't going to win. He made breakfast. That was the division that happened without discussion. She was at the table with the records. He handled the morning livestock and the food, and they met in the middle. When he put a plate of eggs and cornbread next to her notebook, she ate without stopping what she was doing. And he sat across from her and watched the reconciliation chart taking shape with the expression of a man watching someone diffuse something he had been afraid to touch. The Harper survey, Clara said, around a bite of cornbread. Do you have a copy of the original? In the box under the table, Wyatt said. The wooden one. She found it. The original survey was handwritten, dated 1849, with rough boundary notations that bore almost no resemblance to the current county map. The Callahan survey from 1851 was more precise. A professional land surveyor had been brought in, and the coordinates were exact. Crow's legal team is arguing that the 1849 survey establishes prior claim, she said. Yes, but the 1849 survey doesn't actually identify the same landmass, Clara said. She put both documents side by side. Look at this. The Harper survey references the Eastern Creek tributary as a boundary marker. But the creek tributary they're referring to moved in the 1860s. There was flooding, I can see it here, in the county notation, and the tributary shifted almost a quarter-mile west. Which means by the time of the Callahan survey in 1851, the Harper eastern boundary and the Callahan eastern boundary were describing 2 different pieces of ground. Wyatt was very still. Say that again. Clara said it again. Slower this time. with the documents in front of him. He stared at the papers for a long moment. "My father's lawyer mentioned the creek shift once," he said. "But he said it wasn't provable." "It's in the county flood records," Clara said. "From 1863. If someone filed those records correctly, they'd be in the county land archive right now." She looked at him. "Has anyone looked?" The way his jaw tightened told her the answer. "No," he said. "That's where I need to go," Clara said. "Not the boundary walk, first the county archive. If those flood records are there, and they document the creek shift, then Crow's entire prior claim argument is built on a boundary that doesn't exist anymore." She paused. "That would end this, legally, before the inspection even happens." Wyatt looked at her across the table. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not hope exactly, because hope was too fragile a word for the expression on a man who had been fighting this for 2 years. Something harder than hope. Something that looked like the first breath after a very long time underwater. "If you can find those records," he said, "Martin needs to see them immediately." "Martin is your lawyer?" "Yes, Martin Graves. His office is on the west end of Red Hollow." "I'll need to go to town," Clara said. "I'll take you." "You have fences to repair," Clara said. "I can drive the wagon." He looked at her for a moment. "You can drive a wagon." "I grew up managing a dry goods store," she said. "That involves taking deliveries." "Which involves driving wagons." She paused. "Also horses occasionally, depending on the load." Something happened at the corner of his mouth again. That almost smile she'd seen once before. "All right," he said. "I'll hitch the bay. He's easier than the gray." Red Hollow looked different in the morning. Or perhaps it was Clara who looked different. She couldn't be certain. The general store owner, who had watched her with cautious curiosity the day before, was sweeping his front steps when the wagon rolled past, and his expression shifted into something she recognized, riotous. She was not the same woman who had walked in asking for directions yesterday. She was Mrs. Callahan now, driving Wyatt Callahan's wagon into town, and the difference apparently meant something in this county. She didn't stop at the general store. The county land archive was a back room of the courthouse building, not advertised, barely signed, accessible through a side door that required knowing it existed. Clara found it by asking the clerk at the courthouse window, who directed her with the slightly suspicious helpfulness of a government employee encountering someone with a specific purpose. The archive was tended by a woman named Pearl, who was somewhere in her 60s, had a formidable iron-gray braid, and greeted Clara's request for flood records from 1863 with the focused enthusiasm of a person whose professional skill was rarely asked for. 1863 flood documentation, Pearl said, with the satisfaction of someone selecting a weapon. "Red Hollow Creek Basin?" "Yes," Clara said. "Specifically tributary movement, Eastern Basin, around the area of what's now the Callahan Creek Ranch boundary." Pearl did not ask why. She disappeared into the shelves for 11 minutes and returned with 3 volumes and 2 rolled maps. Clara spent the next 2 hours at the archive table. The records were there, all of them. The county surveyor's assessment from 1863, documenting the tributary shift with precision measurements, coordinates, a hand-drawn map showing the creek's position before and after the 1861 flooding. The eastern tributary had shifted 23 feet to the west. A notation by the county surveyor specifically observed that any boundary claim referencing the 1849 Eastern Creek tributary as a landmark must be understood in light of this geographic change. Clara read that sentence 3 times. Then she asked Pearl if she could have certified copies made. Pearl made them herself, pressed the county seal to each one, and did not ask a single question. "You're Wyatt Callahan's new wife," Pearl said, as she handed Clara the rolled copies. "I am," Clara said. Pearl looked at her for a moment, with the clear-eyed appraisal of a woman who had been watching this county long enough to know most of its secrets. "Callahan's a good man," she said. "His father was a good man before him." "I'm beginning to understand that," Clara said. Pearl nodded once. "Benjamin Crow's been in those same records," she said quietly. "About 6 weeks ago, he sent his lawyer, Clara looked at her. And they didn't ask about the 1,863 flood documents, Pearl said. They looked at the survey records. The original Harper survey. She paused. They didn't look at the flood records because they didn't know to look. Clara held her gaze. Thank you, Pearl. Pearl said nothing. She turned back to her shelves. Clara walked out into the morning with 3 certified county documents under her arm and her heart beating with the specific controlled velocity of someone carrying something that could change everything. She found Martin Graves' office on the west end of the main street. She walked in without an appointment. The clerk tried to ask her to wait. She said, "My name is Clara Callahan, and I have certified county documents that directly affect the Callahan land claim. Tell Mr. Graves he has 5 minutes to see me before I take these to the county judge directly." She was shown in immediately. Martin Graves was older than she'd expected, 70 perhaps, with the careful, economical movement of a man who had learned which energy was worth spending. He had represented Wyatt's father first, then Wyatt. He looked at Clara with the particular attention of a lawyer encountering something he hadn't anticipated. She laid the 3 certified copies on his desk. She explained what she'd found in the archive. She walked him through the reasoning, the Harper survey boundary, the 1,863 flood shift, the county surveyor's notation. Martin Graves read everything she put in front of him. He read it slowly and completely, and his expression during the reading was the expression of a man keeping himself very quiet, because if he reacted too early and was wrong, it would cost something he couldn't afford. When he finished, he set the last document down. He looked up at Clara. "Where did you find these?" he said. "The County Land Archive," Clara said. "Back room of the courthouse. Pearl Simmons maintains the collection." "I have been practicing law in this county for 31 years, Martin Graves said very carefully. "And I have never thought to look at the 1,863 flood records." "You were looking at the survey documents," Clara said. "So was Crow's lawyer. You were both focused on the 1,849 Harper claim. But the Harper claim's eastern boundary is a geographic feature that no longer exists in the location the 1,849 survey describes." She paused. "Which means the claim itself is based on a boundary that can't be legally located." Martin was quiet for a long moment. He picked up the county surveyor's notation and read the specific sentence again. Then he set it down. "This doesn't automatically end Crow's case," he said. "He'll argue that the boundary description is interpretive, not literal. His lawyer is good, but the burden shifts," Clara said. "Right now, Wyatt has to prove the Callahan claim is valid. If we file these records as evidence, Crow has to prove the Harper boundary still applies despite the 1,863 geographic change. He has to prove a negative." Martin looked at her. "That is correct," he said. "Then we file today," Clara said. "I'll need Wyatt's signature. I'll have it to you by this afternoon," Clara said. She stood. "Can you file before the end of the week?" "If I have the signature by this afternoon," Martin said slowly, "I can file by Thursday." "Good." Clara picked up her bag. "Don't let Crow's people know you're filing until it's done." Martin Graves looked at her with an expression that was part professional respect, part something he didn't quite have words for. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, "how long have you been in Red Hollow?" "Since yesterday afternoon," Clara said. She walked out of the office and climbed back into the wagon and drove east toward the ranch with the specific focus of a woman who has 4 hours of work left before dark and does not intend to waste a single minute of them. Wyatt was at the fence line on the north boundary. When she got back, she could see the work he'd done. 3 new posts already set. The wire tightened. He heard the wagon and turned, and she could see from 30 yards away that he was reading her face the way he'd been reading everything about her directly, without pretense. She held up the tube of rolled documents. He walked to the wagon. She told him everything: the flood records, the creek shift, the county surveyor's notation, Martin Graves's office, what she'd said and what he'd said. Wyatt listened without interrupting. He stood beside the wagon with his hands at his sides and his eyes on her face, and she could see under the control, under the years of careful guardedness, something shifting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You found this in one morning," he said. "It was in the records," Clara said. "Someone just had to look at the right ones." "I've been fighting this for 2 years," he said. "My father's lawyer looked at those records." Martin looked at those records. "They looked at the survey records," Clara said. "The flood records are in a different section of the archive. Different indexing system. Easy to miss if you're not looking for a geographic change, specifically." She paused. "I was looking for anything that could shift the legal burden. So I looked at everything." Wyatt was looking at her with that expression she didn't have a complete name for yet. It was the same one he'd worn across the kitchen table this morning, when she'd explained the creek boundary argument, something that had moved past recalibration into something more complicated. "Martin needs your signature," Clara said, "this afternoon." "Can you go to town?" "Yes," he said. "Good." She handed him the document tube. "Take these with you. He has copies, but take the originals." He took the tube. His hand was close to hers for a moment on the paper, and neither of them moved away immediately. "Clara," he said. "It's not done yet," she said. "Filing the evidence doesn't end it. Crow will respond. His lawyer will argue the boundary interpretation. Martin will need to counter-argue." She was talking faster than she needed to. She knew it. "And the inspection is still happening regardless. We need the records in order, the fence line repaired, the livestock count documented. We haven't solved everything. We've just shifted the ground." "Clara," Wyatt said again. She stopped talking. "Thank you," he said. Simple words. Said the way he said everything directly, without performance, with his full attention behind them. She looked at him for a moment. The afternoon light was in his face, and he looked tired in the way a person looked when they'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had just, for the first moment, been able to set it down. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "We've got 16 days. "I know," he said. But something in the way he said it had changed. He went to town that afternoon. Clara stayed at the ranch and spent the remaining daylight hours finishing the ledger reconciliation, organizing the supply account history into a clean presentation that covered the past 4 years, and making a detailed list of the property improvements Wyatt had made since his father's death. The wells deepened, the barn reinforced, the water trough system expanded. All of it documented in the ranch records, scattered across different ledgers and account books. She pulled it together into one unified report, written clearly in her careful hand, designed to be understood by a county inspector on his first pass-through. She was at the table when Wyatt returned after dark. He came in and set his hat on the hook by the door and looked at what she'd done to the papers in his absence. "Martin filed," he said. "Good," Clara said. She didn't look up from the page she was finishing. He said that in 31 years of practice, the boundary argument you identified is the most significant piece of new evidence he's seen in a land case in this county." Clara's hand paused on the page, just for a second. He also said, Wyatt continued, that Crow's lawyer is going to respond quickly and aggressively. That we should expect a counter-filing within days. And possibly, he said pressure on the inspection process. More direct pressure than before. Clara set her pen down and looked up. "What kind of pressure?" Wyatt's jaw was tight. He's seen it before. A wealthy man with a weakened legal position who knows time is running out. He starts applying pressure in other directions, making things difficult on the ground. Making the inspection harder to pass, regardless of what the paperwork says. "Cut fence post," Clara said. Or worse, Wyatt said. They looked at each other across the table, across the organized records, across the 2 days of work they'd done together, across the marriage certificate that was still on the small table upstairs, and Clara felt the full weight of what she had walked into. Not just a legal dispute, not just a land title, a man with money and power and the willingness to use both, who had just had his best argument challenged, and who would now look for another way to win. "Then we work faster," Clara said. Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. "You're not afraid," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was closer to wonder. "I didn't say that," Clara said. She picked up her pen. "I said we work faster." Ranger padded in from wherever he'd been and lay down under the table, close enough that his warm weight pressed against Clara's feet. She didn't move away. Outside, the Texas night had settled in, fully wide and dark and full of the sounds of a working ranch in the hours when the work never entirely stopped. Inside the house, the lamplight held, and Clara Whitfield, who had come to this place looking for steady wages, turned to the next page in her notebook and kept going. The counterfiling arrived on a Thursday. Martin Graves sent a rider out to the ranch with a copy of Crow's response, and Clara read it at the kitchen table while Wyatt stood behind her with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the particular way it got when he was controlling something he didn't want to show. Crow's lawyer was a man named Aldridge, based in Austin, which told Clara everything she needed to know about how seriously Crow was taking this now. The filing was 42 pages. She read all of them. Wyatt watched her read without speaking, which she had come to recognize as one of his particular qualities. He understood when silence was more useful than commentary. The argument was sophisticated. Aldridge conceded the 1,863 flood shift, but argued that the Harper Survey's eastern boundary reference was not intended as a fixed geographic coordinate, but as a directional indicator, meaning the boundary should be interpreted as moving with the creek, not fixed at its 1,849 position. Under that reading, the Callahan property's eastern edge overlapped with the Harper claim regardless of the creek's current location. It was wrong. Clara knew it was wrong within the first 10 pages. But it was wrong in the way that expensive lawyers were wrong persuasively, with enough technical language to make a county inspector uncertain. "He's not trying to win the legal argument outright," she said when she set the last page down. "He's trying to create enough ambiguity that the inspector hesitates. If Peake marks the claim as disputed in his report, the land office can delay the title confirmation indefinitely." "Which gives Crow time to work other angles," Wyatt said. "Yes. Can Martin counter it?" "Martin can counter the legal argument," Clara said. "The directional indicator theory is thin. There's a county ruling from 1871 that established fixed coordinate interpretation as the standard for all historical boundary surveys in this district. Aldridge would know that, which means he knows his argument isn't strong enough to win in court. He just needs it to be strong enough to confuse an inspector for 48 hours. Wyatt pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. It was the first time he'd sat at the table while she was working instead of standing behind her or across from her. She noticed the shift without commenting on it. "So what do we do?" he said. "We make Peake's job so simple that there's nothing to be confused about," Clara said. "Every piece of evidence we present has to be self-explanatory. No gaps he has to interpret, no ambiguities he has to resolve on his own. He reads our file, and the answer is already there." She turned to a fresh page in her notebook. "I need 3 more things from the county archive. I need the 1,871 boundary ruling. I need the county surveyor's original field notes from the 1,851 Callahan survey, not the final document. The working notes, because those will show the exact methodology used and confirm it was fixed coordinate from the beginning. And I need the deed chain every property transfer in the county involving the Eastern Creek Basin from 1849 to present." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. "That's a lot of archive work," he said. 2 days, Clara said. "Maybe 3. Pearl will help." He looked at her profile for a moment. "You're sure about Pearl?" "Pearl certified those flood documents without asking me a single question about why I needed them," Clara said. "She knew exactly what she was doing when she handed them to me. She's been in that archive longer than Crow has been in this county." Something shifted in Wyatt's expression. "I never thought to go to her directly." "Most people don't," Clara said. "They go to the official channel. The clerk at the front window, the lawyer who knows the system. Pearl sits in the back room with every document this county has ever filed and waits for someone to ask the right questions." She paused. "She's been waiting a long time, I think." Wyatt was quiet for another moment. "Then 14 days. I know. And the fence line on the south boundary still needs." I know, Clara said. You do the fence, I'll do the archive. We can't afford to fall behind on either. He didn't argue. She was learning that his silences had different qualities. This one was the silence of a man who had spent 2 years trying to fight a multi-front battle alone, and who was still, even now, adjusting to the fact that he wasn't alone anymore. The adjustment, she could see, was harder for him than he let on. It was hard for her too, in different ways. She went to town the next morning and spent the day with Pearl. The 1871 ruling was exactly where it needed to be, a clear, 5-page county court decision that established fixed coordinate interpretation as the binding standard for all historical surveys in Red Hollow County. The surveyor's field notes from 1851 were in better condition than Clara had hoped and worse condition than she would have liked, but the relevant sections were legible and precise. The deed chain took until late afternoon to trace, but when she finished, it showed an unbroken transfer from the original 1851 Callahan grant through every subsequent county registration to Wyatt's current title. No gaps. No competing registrations, no overlapping claims in the official record until Crow's filing 2 years ago. Pearl watched Clara work through the afternoon without interrupting. When Clara finally sat back and looked at what she had assembled, Pearl brought her a cup of tea from somewhere in the back of the archive and set it beside her without comment. "This is enough," Clara said. "It should have been enough 2 years ago," Pearl said. Clara looked up at her. "Crow's lawyer Aldridge. Has he been here since the counter-filing?" Pearl's expression shifted, just slightly. "No, but someone from his office came in yesterday morning. Young man, very polished, said he was doing routine research." "What did he look at?" "The 1851 survey record," Pearl said. "And the chain of title, the same documents I'm looking at." "Yes," Pearl said, "though he didn't go further back than 1851. And he didn't look at the field notes." Clara absorbed this. Aldridge was shoring up his argument, confirming what he already knew, looking for weaknesses in the chain of title. He hadn't looked at the field notes because his argument didn't depend on survey methodology. He was betting on ambiguity, not on evidence. Clara said carefully, "Is there anything in this archive that Crow's people could use? Anything I'm not seeing that could be turned against the Callahan claim?" Pearl sat down across the table from her. It was the first time she'd sat down all day. She looked at Clara with those clear-eyed, patient eyes. "There's a gap in the livestock registration," Pearl said. 1878. The county required annual livestock registration for all ranches above a certain size. Wyatt's father missed the 1878 filing. He filed in 1879 and listed both years' cattle in one document, which was allowed, but the 1878 registration technically shows as incomplete. Clara looked at her. "Crow knows about this." "Aldridge asked to see the livestock registration records the first time he came to this archive," Pearl said. 14 months ago." Clara kept her face still. "How significant is the gap?" "Under the current standard, not significant at all. It was remedied in the next filing cycle, which was within the allowed period. But if someone wanted to argue that it represented a lapse in household managements, they could try," Clara said. "They could make the inspector look at it." "Yes," Pearl said. "They could try." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled her notebook toward her and wrote, 1878 livestock gap, find remediation documentation, confirm cure within allowed period. She looked up. "Is the 1879 combined filing in the record?" "Yes." "Does it explicitly reference the 1878 period?" "It does." Wyatt's father wrote a note explaining the missed filing and the combined registration. The county clerk stamped it accepted. "I need a certified copy of the 1879 filing," Clara said. "And the clerk's acceptance notation. If Aldridge tries to use the 1878 gap, I want the cure document in our evidence file before he can build an argument around the gap itself." Pearl stood up. "Give me 10 minutes," she said. Clara sat in the archive room after Pearl disappeared into the shelves and felt the particular quality of this kind of work settle over her, not the anxiety of being behind, but the focused, forward-leaning attention of someone who was, for the first time in a long time, doing exactly what she was built for. This was what she was good at, finding the gap before the other side found it, closing it before they could exploit it, building a record so complete and so clean that there was nothing left to attack. She had done it for her father's business for 6 years, keeping the accounts in order, managing the supply relationships, holding the paper side of a small operation together through 2 difficult economic years. She had done it well enough that when the end came, it had not come from her side of the ledger. The debt that had swallowed Whitfield and Sons dry goods was her father's debt, borrowed in a desperate year from a lender who had called it in at the worst possible moment. Her books had been perfect. The money had simply run out. She had thought, for 8 months, that her skill had failed her. Sitting in this archive, she understood that it hadn't. It had been waiting for something worthy of it. Pearl came back with the certified copies. Clara added them to her file. She thanked Pearl, packed everything carefully, and drove back to the ranch. Wyatt had company when she arrived. She saw the unfamiliar horse tied at the post before she reached the gate, and she felt something change in her chest, a tightening, a sharpening. Not fear, alertness. She drove the wagon through the gate and toward the house, with her file of documents on the seat beside her and her eyes moving over the yard. Wyatt was on the porch, standing, not sitting. His posture was the posture of a man being patient under pressure, controlled, upright, the kind of stillness that takes effort. The man across from him was someone Clara had never seen. He was well-dressed for a ranch visit, too well-dressed, which was itself a message. Dark coat, clean boots, somewhere in his late 40s, with the soft hands and direct eyes of someone who had learned to use presence as a tool. She climbed down from the wagon with her file under her arm and walked toward the porch without hurrying. Wyatt saw her and said, "Clara." The man in the dark coat turned. He looked at her the way powerful men sometimes looked at women they hadn't expected to encounter, assessing, briefly adjusting, settling into a new calculation. "Mrs. Callahan," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced. "That's right," Clara said. She climbed the porch steps and stood beside Wyatt. "I don't believe we've met," Benjamin Crow, the man said. "I own the Crow Cattle Company, Eastern Red Hollow County. I've been a neighbor of your husband's family for many years." "I've heard your name," Clara said. Something in Crow's expression acknowledged that and filed it away. "I came to speak with Wyatt about the upcoming inspection," he said. "As a matter of neighborly interest." "Neighborly," Wyatt said. The word in his mouth was flat as a stone. Crow smiled, the kind of smile that did not reach anywhere near his eyes. "I understand your legal team filed some new documents this week. I wanted to assure Wyatt personally that I bear no ill will in this process. The legal proceedings are simply due diligence. I'm sure the inspector will sort everything out appropriately." "I'm sure he will," Clara said. Crow looked at her. Then at the file she was carrying. "You've been to town?" he said. "I have," Clara said. She did not elaborate a beat. Crow's gaze stayed on the file. "May I ask what you're working on?" "Ranch management," Clara said pleasantly. "We have an inspection in less than 2 weeks. There's quite a lot to prepare." Another beat. Crow smiled again. "Of course." He looked back at Wyatt. "The offer I mentioned stands, Wyatt. A fair price for the eastern pasture and the creek boundary. You'd keep the house, the home quarter. It would resolve the legal question simply." Wyatt said nothing. "Think about it," Crow said. He moved to the porch steps and stopped. He'd looked at Clara one more time, not threatening, or not overtly. Just measuring Mrs. Callahan. "Pleasure, Mr. Crow," Clara said. They watched him ride out. Neither of them moved until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then Wyatt turned to look at her. His jaw was tight, in a way she hadn't seen since that first afternoon when she'd stood in the doorway and listened to the conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. "He came here himself," Clara said. "He's never done that before," Wyatt said. "He works through lawyers, through land office contacts. He doesn't come in person. He's Scared, Clara said. Wyatt looked at her sharply. The counterfiling is a defensive move, she said. He's not pressing forward, he's trying to hold his position. And coming here personally, making an offer to buy the eastern pasture, that's not a man who thinks he's winning. That's a man trying to find an exit before the ground shifts entirely. She paused. What did he offer for the eastern pasture? $1,400. What's it worth? At least 4 times that, Wyatt said. So he came here and offered you a quarter of the value of a piece of land that his entire legal case depends on, Clara said. Because he'd rather pay something than lose everything. She turned and went into the house. Over her shoulder, he's going to try something else when you say no. Be ready. Wyatt came inside behind her and closed the door. She was already at the table, opening the file from the archive. Crow's people found the 1,878 livestock gap, she said. They know about it. I've got the cure documentation, the 1,879 combined filing with the clerk's acceptance stamp. But I want to write a brief summary document that contextualizes it before Peake's inspection. Something that explains the gap and the remedy in plain language before Peake encounters it in the records and has to form his own interpretation. Wyatt stood for a moment. He was still carrying what Crow's visit had left on him, she could see it. Wyatt, she said. He looked at her. He came here because he's running out of options, she said. That means we're doing this right. He let out a slow breath. Nodded. What do you need from me? He said. Sit down and tell me everything you remember about the 1,878 and 1,879 livestock filings. Anything your father said about it, any documentation you have on the ranch side. I want the explanation to be complete. He sat down. He talked. She wrote. Outside, the afternoon moved toward evening, and Ranger came in, through the back door and lay under the table, and the lamp burned low, and Clara trimmed it without stopping the conversation. And somewhere in the middle of talking about his father's second year of illness, and the way the ranch records had slid during those months, Wyatt stopped speaking mid-sentence. Clara looked up. What? He was looking at the table, at the organized files, at her notebook filled with careful writing, at the archived documents arranged in sequence. Then he looked at her. My father used to say, he said quietly, that the most important thing on a ranch wasn't the cattle or the land. It was the person who kept everything from falling apart while you were looking the other direction. Clara held his gaze. He meant my mother, Wyatt said. She kept the books. She managed the supply accounts. She knew where everything was. He paused. She died when I was 19. And I think part of what Crow has been able to do these past 2 years is because I've been trying to do what she did at the same time as everything else. And I wasn't good enough at it. The room was very quiet. You're good at the land, Clara said. You're good at the cattle. You're good at knowing every post on this fence line and every spring on this property. She paused. The books weren't your strength. That's not a failure. That's just what you needed someone else for. Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. Is that what you tell yourself about what you're good at? Clara almost smiled. Almost no, she said. I tell myself I can do most things if I'm given the chance to try. Can you? He said. Ask me in 12 days, she said. After inspection. Something shifted in his face. The tiredness didn't leave, but something alongside it changed. Something that made the tired look less like defeat and more like endurance. He picked up the pen she'd left on the table and handed it back to her. Where were we? She found the page. 1,878 fall livestock count, she said. Your father's note, he said, and he kept talking. 3 days later, Clara found the letter. She was reorganizing the second drawer of the house's writing desk, a piece of furniture that had been her project for the past 2 days. Clearing out the accumulated miscellany of a household run by a man who put paper everywhere except where it was supposed to go when she found it at the very back of the bottom drawer, underneath a survey map and a broken compass. It was addressed to Wyatt's father, from the Red Hollow County Land Office. Dated 18 months before Wyatt's father died. She read it standing at the desk, and when she finished, she sat down in the nearest chair because her legs needed a moment. The letter was from a deputy land office clerk named Foster, who had apparently known Callahan Sr. and felt enough obligation to him to write a private warning. It was 3 paragraphs. It explained that Benjamin Crow had approached the land office 6 months prior with a legal opinion prepared by an Austin firm, Aldridge's firm, though the letter didn't name Aldridge, specifically arguing the validity of the Harper survey claim. It explained that 2 members of the inspections committee had indicated sympathy for Crow's position. And it warned, in the careful language of a man who knew the limits of what he could put in writing, that the inspection process for Callahan Creek Ranch, whenever it occurred, would not be impartial. Wyatt's father had known. He had read this letter and known what was coming, and then he had gotten sick, and then he had died, and the letter had gone into the back of the desk drawer. Clara sat with it for a long moment. Then she went to find Wyatt. He was at the barn as he usually was in the late afternoon. She came in and held the letter out to him without preamble. He looked at it, then at her face, and took it. She watched him read. She watched his expression change. Not dramatically, Wyatt Callahan did not do dramatic. But she could see it move through him, recognition, then something older and more painful than that. He knew, Wyatt said. He wasn't asking, Clara said. He never told me. Wyatt set the letter down on the rail. He stood looking at it. He was sick by the time I would have been able to do anything, and maybe he thought I had enough to carry. He stopped. Or maybe he thought he had more time. Clara said nothing. Some things did not need a response. They needed to be heard. After a moment, Wyatt picked the letter up again. Foster, he said, looking at the signature. He retired, moved to Abilene. I haven't thought about him in years. He took a risk putting this in writing, Clara said. He was a decent man, Wyatt said. The letter is evidence, Clara said carefully. It's not county certified, and Crow's team will argue it's hearsay, but it documents that 2 inspection committee members were approached by Crow's legal team before the proceedings even began. That's not a neutral process. That's a corrupted one. She paused. Martin needs to see this. Wyatt looked at her. It won't be enough on its own. No, Clara said. But it changes the conversation. If Martin can use it to formally request the appointment of an independent inspector, someone outside the county committee's influence, then Peake goes in without pressure from either of those committee members. Wyatt was very still. Can Martin do that, he said. I don't know, Clara said, but I think he needs to try. They rode to town together that evening, the 2 of them side by side in the wagon, for the second time, and this time the silence between them was different from the first ride, not the cautious silence of 2 strangers, but the focused silence of 2 people thinking about the same problem. Martin Graves read the letter twice. Then he set it down and looked at both of them across his desk. Wyatt, he said, did you know your father received this? No, Wyatt said. Martin nodded slowly. He looked at Clara. This is the 3rd piece of material evidence you've found in 10 days. It was in the desk, Clara said. I've been in that house, Martin said. I've looked through those papers. You were looking for legal documents, Clara said. This was correspondence. Different drawer. Martin looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the letter. I can file a petition for independent inspector appointment on the basis of demonstrated procedural bias. The letter isn't certified, but the law doesn't require certification for a bias petition. It requires a preponderance of evidence, suggesting the process is compromised. He paused. The flood records, the boundary argument, and now documented ex parte contact with the inspection committee. Together, that's a preponderance. Will they grant it? Wyatt said. The petition goes to the district judge, not the county committee, Martin said. Judge Harlan is not sympathetic to Crow. He's had 2 interactions with him over the years that I know about, and neither ended well. He looked at the letter again. I think he grants it. Clara felt something in her chest, that she was careful not to show a careful provisional relief, the kind that knew better than to arrive too early. File the petition, she said. Martin looked at her. Then at Wyatt. Wyatt said file it. What happened next came from a direction none of them anticipated. It was 3 days before the inspection. Clara was at the county archive for what she'd told herself would be her final visit, confirming the last 2 documents in the evidence file, verifying the certified copies against the originals one more time. Pearl was at her desk. The morning was quiet. Then the door to the archive opened and a man came in that Clara had never seen. And Pearl looked up from her desk, and her expression changed in a way Clara had never seen it change. "Mr. Aldridge," Pearl said. Clara kept her eyes on the document in front of her. She did not turn around. She heard the footsteps cross the room toward Pearl's desk, and she heard Aldridge's voice, smooth, practiced, the voice of an expensive lawyer on routine business. "I need to review several documents," Aldridge said. "The 1851 Callahan survey, the Harper survey, and the chain of title for the Eastern Creek Basin parcels." "I believe you have the file." "I do," Pearl said. "Excellent," Aldridge said. "I'd also like to review any flood documentation for the Eastern Basin." "Historical. Pre-1880. Clara's hand went very still on the page in front of her. "Of course," Pearl said. Her voice was entirely neutral. "I'll need a few minutes to locate everything." "Take your time," Aldridge said. Pearl disappeared into the shelves. Clara heard Aldridge settle into a chair somewhere behind her, not at her table, but close. Close enough that she was aware of him without looking. She turned the page she'd been examining. Continued reading. Gave nothing. Pearl came back with a stack of documents and set them in front of Aldridge with the same efficient courtesy she showed everyone. Clara heard the rustle of papers as Aldridge began reviewing. Several minutes passed, then, "Excuse me." Clara turned. Aldridge was looking at her directly. He had the kind of face that was difficult to read precisely because it was designed to be pleasant surface. Very little beneath it you could grab onto. "I apologize for interrupting," he said. "You're Clara Callahan, aren't you? Wyatt Callahan's wife?" "Yes," Clara said. He smiled, practiced, warm, entirely controlled. "Aldridge, I represent Mr. Benjamin Crow in the land proceedings." He paused. "I imagine you know who I am." "I do," Clara said. "I hope this isn't uncomfortable," he said. "The archive is a public space." "We're both entitled to be here." "Yes," Clara said. "We are." He looked at the documents on her table. She'd been careful about which ones were visible, and the most significant items were in her closed file. But he could see the 1879 livestock registration at the corner of the table, and she saw his eyes catch it. "You've been doing considerable research," he said. "Ranch management requires it," Clara said. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was carefully friendly and not quite friendly at all. "Mrs. Callahan, may I speak plainly?" "Please," Clara said. "My client is a reasonable man," Aldridge said. "He has legitimate legal interests in the Creek Basin property. But he's also practical. He understands that protracted legal proceedings benefit no one. The offer he made to your husband regarding the eastern pasture was a quarter of its value," Clara said. Aldridge paused. "I'm sure there's room to discuss the figure." "There isn't," Clara said. Her voice was entirely pleasant. "Mr. Callahan's family has held that land for 30 years. The boundary argument you're counterfiling is based on was constructed around a geographic feature that hasn't existed in its claimed location since 1863, which is documented in the county flood records your client's people have apparently not reviewed carefully." She paused. "You're reviewing them now. I imagine you're discovering that." Aldridge looked at her. For the first time since he'd walked through the door, something behind his practiced expression moved. "You found the flood records," he said. It came out as a statement. 2 weeks ago," Clara said. Silence. "You've been in this county for 15 days, Clara said. "Yes." Aldridge looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the documents in front of him. Then he looked at Clara again. "You're quite thorough, Mrs. Callahan," he said. His voice had changed, still controlled, but the warmth was gone. What was underneath it was something more direct and considerably less comfortable. "I grew up managing the books for my family's business," Clara said. "I learned early that the gap you don't know about is the one that ends you." She paused. "We've closed the gaps." Aldridge said nothing. "We've also filed for an independent Inspector Clara continued. On the basis of documented ex parte contact with the County Inspection Committee. The petition is before Judge Harlan. She watched his face. She saw the moment he understood that the ground had moved under him while he'd been looking in the wrong direction. Judge Harlan, he said. Yes, Clara said. Another silence. Aldridge looked down at the flood documents Pearl had set in front of him. He looked at them with the expression of a man reading something he very much wished he'd read 2 months ago. He stood up. He straightened his coat. He looked at Clara one more time. Good day, Mrs. Callahan, he said. Good day, Mr. Aldridge, she said. She heard him cross the archive and go out the door. She heard Pearl emerge from somewhere in the shelves a moment later and sit back down at her desk. Clara sat at the table for another moment. She looked at the document in front of her. She was aware that her heart was moving considerably faster than she was letting her face show. Then she went back to work. She was there another hour, finishing the last verification in the evidence file. When she finally packed everything and stood up to leave, Pearl spoke from behind her desk without looking up from whatever she was cataloging. He'll report back to Crow today, Pearl said. I know, Clara said. And Crow will know the filing is weak. Yes. And Pearl paused. Well, a man like Crow, when he loses the legal angle, sometimes looks for another one. Clara stopped at the door. She turned back. Pearl was looking at her now. I've watched Crow operate in this county for 15 years, Pearl said. The legal process is his preference because it's clean and deniable. But it's not his only tool, she held Clara's gaze. Be careful at the ranch. The next 9 days. Clara looked at her. Thank you, Pearl, she said. She went out to the wagon and drove east. The afternoon was sharp and clear, and the road back to Callahan Creek Ranch lay straight ahead, and whatever was coming from the direction of a man who had just learned that everything he'd planned for was not going to work. And Clara Whitfield, Clara Callahan, now, whatever that meant, whatever it was becoming, drove toward it with her file of evidence on the seat beside her and her eyes on the road ahead. Whatever Crow tried next, she intended to be ready. Pearl's warning arrived in Clara's chest like a stone dropped in still water, and the ripples didn't stop moving. She drove back to the ranch with one hand on the reins and the other resting on the file of documents beside her, and she thought about what Pearl had said with the precision of someone trying to predict where the next blow would come from. Crow had lost the legal angle, not completely, not yet, but Aldridge had walked out of that archive, knowing the flood records had already been found and filed, knowing the boundary argument was compromised, knowing the independent inspector petition was sitting in front of a judge who had no affection for Benjamin Crow. The counter-filing would be withdrawn or quietly abandoned within days. The Eastern pasture offer would not be repeated, which meant Crow had nothing left but the ground itself. She told Wyatt that evening, standing in the kitchen, before she'd even set down the document file. She gave it to him straight, Aldridge at the archive, the conversation, what she'd seen on his face when he understood the position he was in, and Pearl's warning at the end. Wyatt listened without moving. He had that quality of stillness when the news was serious, not frozen, but concentrated. Every part of his attention on what she was saying. When she finished, he said, 9 days. 9 days, Clara confirmed. And Crow knows we've found everything. Aldridge knows. He'll have told Crow within hours. Wyatt turned to the window. He stood there for a moment. The south fence, he said. The section I repaired last week, if someone cut it again at the right place, the eastern herd could drift into the contested boundary. Crow could claim the livestock were grazing on disputed land. Would that affect the inspection? It would give the inspector something to question, Wyatt said. And with Crow's people there to point at it, he stopped. I need to ride the south line tonight. Not alone, Clara said. He turned to look at her. I mean it, she said. Pearl said he looks for other tools when the legal angle closes. You, riding the fence line alone at night, when Crow's men know the legal case is falling apart, is exactly the situation they'd want. I can't leave the fence line open. I know that. Take someone with you. She paused. Is there anyone in town you trust? Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Then Hector Reyes. He ran cattle with my father for 12 years. He's working the Dunbar place east of town now, but he's his own man. He'd come if I asked. Then ask him tomorrow morning, Clara said. Tonight, we checked the fence line together. Wyatt looked at her. Clara, I can ride, she said. You know I can drive a wagon. The horse is simpler. It's not about the riding. Then, what is it about? He looked at her for a moment with that expression. She had no complete name for the one that had been appearing more frequently in the past week, when she said something he hadn't anticipated and had to adjust. It's about the fact that I asked you to save my ranch, he said, and instead you're about to ride a fence line at night for it. Clara looked back at him steadily. You asked me to be your partner, she said. This is what that looks like. He held her gaze. Then he went to get his coat. They rode the south fence line by moonlight, Wyatt on the gray, Clara on the bay she'd been using for town runs, Ranger loping between them. The fence was intact. All of it, every post, every wire run. Either Crow's men hadn't moved yet, or they'd chosen a different approach. They rode back to the ranch in the dark and put the horses up, and neither of them spoke much, but the silence was the comfortable kind. The kind that had been building incrementally through 2 weeks of working alongside each other until it no longer required management. At the kitchen door, Wyatt stopped. Clara almost walked into him. Clara, he said. She looked up. He was facing her, and in the dark outside the house, she could see the tiredness in him, and the thing that lived underneath the tiredness, the part of him that had been fighting alone for so long, that he'd forgotten what it felt like not to be. I know I said thank you, he said, but I don't think I've said it. I don't think I've said it in a way that he stopped. He was a man who was precise with language when he had time, and completely inadequate with it when the thing he was trying to say was not a fact but a feeling. You don't have to, Clara said. I want to. She looked at him. Then say it right, she said, not as gratitude. Say what it actually is. He was quiet for a moment. The night around them was enormous and still. I haven't been able to sleep since my father died, he said. Not really. I close my eyes and I'm already thinking about the next problem. The fence line, the title, the ledger. What Crow is planning. He paused. Last night was the first night in 2 years I slept until dawn. Clara didn't say anything. She stood in the dark and let that be what it was. I don't know what that means exactly, Wyatt said. But I thought you should know it. I know what it means, Clara said quietly. She went inside. She climbed the stairs. She lay down in the room that had been his sister's and stared at the ceiling. And she thought about steady wages and newspaper clippings and marriage certificates and flood records. And she thought about what it meant to arrive somewhere looking for one thing and find yourself building something entirely different. She fell asleep before she could finish the thought. The next morning, Hector Reyes arrived before Clara had finished her second cup of coffee. He was a compact man in his mid-50s, dark-eyed and observant, with the weathered hands of someone who had worked the same kind of country for decades. He shook Clara's hand when Wyatt introduced them and looked at her with the direct appraisal of a man who made his assessments quickly and stood by them. You're the one who found the flood records, Hector said. News travels, Clara said. Pearl told her sister, Hector said. Her sister told half the county. He looked at Wyatt. What do you need? I need someone I trust on the south fence line, Wyatt said. Days and nights, for the next 9 days, I can pay. You can owe me a favor, Hector said. Callahan land stays Callahan land. That matters to people in this county, even if they don't say it loud enough. He looked around the yard. I'll bring my nephew. He's 17, but he's reliable. We'll camp on the south line. I don't want either of you in the middle of something dangerous, Wyatt said. Wyatt, Hector's voice was patient and very firm. I worked this ranch for 12 years. I watched your father build it. I'm not going to stand in Abilene while Crow's men walk the fence line at night. He paused. I'll be out there by noon. He was. With Hector and his nephew covering the south line, Wyatt moved to repairing the 2 weak spots on the north boundary that Clara had identified on her original fence walk. Clara drove to town for what she told Wyatt was the last time before the inspection. Because there was nothing left to gather, and delivered the complete evidence file to Martin Graves in a leather case she'd organized with tabbed sections and a written index at the front. Martin looked at the index for a long time. "Every document certified," he said. "Every document certified," Clara confirmed. "The flood records, the 1,871 ruling, the surveyor's field notes, the deed chain, the 1,879 livestock cure filing, the foster letter with a notarized statement of provenance, and the 1,851 survey methodology notes, confirming fixed coordinate interpretation was the original intent." She paused. "There's also a summary document I wrote 4 pages that presents the evidence narrative in plain language, structured so that an inspector reading it for the first time understands the complete picture before he opens a single original document." Martin set the case down on his desk. He looked at Clara over the top of his spectacles. "The independent inspector petition," he said. "Judge Harlan granted it this morning." Clara went still. "He appointed a man named Samuel Reed," Martin continued. 22 years with the State Land Office. He's not from this county, he comes from Dallas. He has no relationship with Crow, no relationship with the County Inspection Committee, and no prior involvement in this case." "When does Reed arrive?" Clara said. "Day after tomorrow," Martin said. "The inspection is still on schedule. Reed reviews the file tonight and conducts the site inspection on the appointed day." Clara looked at Martin Graves. He was watching her with an expression that had evolved considerably in the past 2 weeks, from the politely surprised lawyer who had received a woman he hadn't expected with documents he hadn't seen, to something that looked now very much like respect with a certain amount of awe underneath it. "Martin," Clara said, "is there anything we haven't done?" He thought about that seriously. "I don't believe so," he said. "I believe this is the strongest case this ranch has had since the day your father-in-law filed the original title." Clara picked up her bag. "Then we go home and we wait." "One more thing," Martin said. She stopped. "Crow's team withdrew the counterfiling this morning," he said. "An hour before Harlan granted the independent inspector petition. Aldridge filed a procedural withdrawal. No explanation given." Clara looked at him. "They cut their losses before the ruling made it worse," she said. "Yes," Martin said, "which means the inspection happens against a clean legal record. No active competing claim. No ambiguity for Reed to navigate." Clara stood with that for a moment. 2 weeks ago, Crow's counterfiling had felt like a wall. Now it was gone, withdrawn by the people who'd built it because they'd finally read the room clearly enough to know it wasn't going to stand. "Thank you, Martin," she said. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, "the thanks run the other direction." She drove back to the ranch and told Wyatt everything: Reed's appointment, the withdrawal, the timeline. She watched his face move through the news the way it always did, carefully, not rushing to the conclusion, making sure the understanding was real before he let himself feel it. When she finished, he sat down on the porch step. Just sat. She stayed standing. She gave him the moment. After a while he said, "It's not over." "No," she said. "Reed still has to inspect. The evidence still has to hold. But the counterfiling is gone." "Yes, and the inspector is clean." "Yes." Wyatt looked at the yard, at the barn, at the fence line visible from the house, at the cattle in the far pasture. "My father used to say this land had its own kind of will," he said. "That things that were built right had a way of surviving what was aimed at them." He paused. "I stopped believing that about 6 months after he died." Clara sat down on the step beside him, not close a foot of space between them, but beside him. "What do you believe now?" she said. Wyatt looked at her. "I think some things survive because someone decides they're going to," he said. "Not because of luck or nature or some quality of the ground. Because a person plants their feet and refuses to let go." Clara looked back at him. "Your father planted his feet," she said. "And you've been planting yours for 2 years." "Just barely holding on," he said. "Holding on is how you survive until help arrives," Clara said. He looked at her for a long moment. Something was moving in his face, something that had been building slowly for 2 weeks, Through shared meals and late nights and ledger columns and fence line rides and every conversation that had started as practical and ended as something else. Something that had been moving toward the surface for days and was now almost there. He didn't say it, not yet, but she could see it. She looked back at the yard. They sat on the porch step together in the afternoon quiet, and Ranger came and put his head on Wyatt's knee, and neither of them moved for a long time. 2 nights before the inspection, something woke Clara at 2 in the morning. She was sitting up before she was fully conscious of why some sound, some quality of Ranger's movement at the top of the stairs. She was on her feet and at the window in seconds, looking out at the dark yard. There was a light at the east fence line, not a lamp, something smaller. A lantern, moving. Clara was at Wyatt's door in 15 seconds. She knocked twice hard. He opened it immediately. He hadn't been asleep either. East fence, she said. Someone's out there. He was dressed in 30 seconds. He had his rifle from the corner of the room and was down the stairs in a movement that was fast and completely silent. Clara followed. Ranger was already at the back door, his body low and his attention fixed east. Wyatt looked at Clara. Stay, he started. No, she said flatly. 1 second of decision. He handed her the lantern and took the rifle and opened the back door. They moved across the yard toward the east fence line. Wyatt led Clara 3 steps behind with Ranger between them. The light she'd seen from the window was still there, stationary now, not moving. Whoever it was had stopped. Wyatt raised his hand. Clara stopped. He moved the last 20 yards alone, low and quiet, and when he reached the fence line, he straightened, and his voice came out hard and loud in the night air. Don't move. I've got a rifle on you and I'll use it. A sound, not the sound of running. The sound of someone dropping something. Don't shoot. A young voice. Frightened. I'm not armed. I work for Mr. Crow. He sent me out here. I didn't. What did he send you to do? Wyatt said. Silence. What did he send you to do? Wyatt said again. Harder. Cut the fence, the young voice said. Just 2 posts on the east run. That's all. I swear that's all. Clara came forward. She held the lantern up. He was young, 19-20 at most. A ranch hand, clearly, with the wire cutters still on the ground where he'd dropped them. He was shaking. What's your name? Clara said. Tommy, he said. Tommy Briggs. Were you here 2 months ago? Wyatt said. When the south fence was cut the first time. Tommy looked at the ground. Yes, sir. And the horse that spooked in the north pasture in June? Another silence. That was Crow's other man, not me. You were just following orders, Clara said. Tommy looked at her. He was young enough that the fear on his face was completely unguarded. I needed the work, he said. I'm sorry. I didn't think about what it meant. You're going to tell us everything Crow told you to do, Clara said. Every instruction. Every other man he has working this. You're going to tell us tonight. And tomorrow morning, you're going to tell Martin Graves. And Martin Graves is going to write it down. And you're going to sign it. Tommy stared at her. If you do that, Clara said, Wyatt isn't going to pursue what happened tonight. Are you, Wyatt? A beat. Wyatt looked at the young man. His expression was hard and unsparing and not unkind. Tell the truth, Wyatt said, and you walk away from this. Tommy Briggs told them everything. It took an hour, standing at the east fence line in the dark. Crow had hired 3 men over the past 5 months to systematically damage the Callahan property in ways that would look like neglect-cut fences. A deliberate contamination of the north water trough that had cost Wyatt a week of repairs he'd attributed to age and drought, the incident with the horse. All of it designed to make the ranch look under-maintained when the inspector arrived. All of it orchestrated by Crow through intermediaries, so nothing could be traced back to him directly. Clara listened and did not speak, except once, when she asked Tommy to repeat a specific detail about the water trough incident, the date, and who had given the instruction. When he finished, Wyatt took the wire cutters from the ground and sent Tommy Briggs in the direction of Red Hollow with the very clear instruction to be at Martin Graves' office at 8 in the morning, or Wyatt would find him. Tommy went. They stood at the east fence line in the quiet after he'd gone. "He'll run," Wyatt said. "He might," Clara said. "But he might not. He's scared of Crow and he's scared of you, and right now he's more scared of Crow because you just gave him a way out. And if he does run, then we have what he told us tonight, and my account of it, and yours, and that's still evidence of a pattern of deliberate interference." She paused. "But I don't think he'll run." Wyatt looked at her. "How do you know?" he said. "Because he said he was sorry," Clara said. "And he meant it," she paused. "People who mean it don't usually run." Tommy Briggs was at Martin Graves' office at 7:45 the next morning. Martin took his statement, 3 hours, complete, every detail written down, and signed with Tommy's full name at the bottom of each page. Martin sent a copy by courier to the county sheriff's office with a cover letter documenting the pattern of deliberate property interference and naming Benjamin Crow as the directing party. By noon, the sheriff had been to Crow's house. By 3 in the afternoon, Martin had a message that Crow's legal team Aldridge, from Austin, was requesting a meeting at the county courthouse the following morning. Clara was at the kitchen table when Martin's rider brought the message to the ranch. She read it, handed it to Wyatt, and watched him read it. He set the paper down. He looked at her. "He's going to try to settle," Clara said. "Before the inspection, before Reed sees the evidence. He knows the sheriff's letter changes everything. It's not just a land dispute anymore. It's documented criminal interference with an active legal proceeding." "What does settling mean?" Wyatt said. "It means he gives up the claim," Clara said. "Formally. Completely. In exchange for the sheriff's office not pursuing criminal charges against him personally." Wyatt was quiet. "Martin will tell you whether that's the right move," Clara said. "I think it is. A settlement with a full claim withdrawal is better than an inspection ruling, because a ruling can be appealed. A settlement is permanent. He walks away clean," Wyatt said. His voice was level, but she could hear what was underneath it. "He walks away," Clara said, "which is not the same as clean. Everyone in this county knows what he did. Pearl knows. Hector knows. Tommy Briggs just signed a statement that will be in the county records for the rest of time." She paused. "Crow will spend the rest of his years in Red Hollow County as the man who tried to steal 30-year-old family land and got stopped by the widow's granddaughter who'd been in the county for 2 weeks. Something crossed Wyatt's face at that. Not amusement, something more complicated and more real. "I'm not a widow," Clara said. "That was a figure of speech." "I know what you are," Wyatt said. She looked at him. His voice had been quiet when he said it. Quiet and completely certain. In the way that things said with complete certainty had a tendency to land. "Martin's meeting is tomorrow at 9, Clara said after a moment. "We should both be there." "Yes," Wyatt said. They were. The courthouse meeting room held Crow, Aldridge, Martin, Wyatt, and Clara, 5 people, 1 table, and the full accumulated weight of 2 years of legal combat and 3 decades of Callahan history. Crow looked different in this room than he had on the porch of the ranch 10 days ago. He was still well-dressed, still upright, still carrying himself with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to rooms like this going his way. But something behind his eyes had changed. The calculation was still there, it would always be there, that was the nature of the man, but it was operating with far less material to work with. He looked at Clara when she came in. She looked back at him without expression and took the chair to Wyatt's right. Aldridge did most of the speaking. It was elegant, the way he phrased it, not a concession, in his telling, but a mutual resolution in the interest of all parties. The Harper claim withdrawal would be filed in full by end of business tomorrow. Crow's competing title application would be formally abandoned. In exchange, Martin would communicate to the sheriff's office that the Callahan family was not pursuing criminal charges against Crow personally for the property interference incidents. Martin looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked at Clara. Clara gave him nothing. This was his call. It had always been his call. Wyatt looked at Crow directly. Across the table, without the fence between them, without the yard, without any of the buffer of distance that made these confrontations bearable. "Your father tried to buy this land from my father in 1871, Wyatt said. My father said no. Your father said he'd find another way. He paused. This is the other way. Crow held his gaze. His expression was difficult to read precisely because it was controlled, but there was something in it, something beneath the control that Clara thought was closer to shame than he would ever admit to. I want it on record, Wyatt said, that the Callahan claim was valid from 1851. That the Harper survey argument was without merit. That this settlement represents the abandonment of a claim that should never have been filed. Wyatt Martin started. I want it in the settlement language, Wyatt said. He hadn't moved his eyes from Crow. Written filed. Part of the county record. Aldridge leaned over and murmured something to Crow. Crow was still looking at Wyatt. Fine, Crow said. His voice was flat. Martin wrote the language. Aldridge reviewed it. Both parties signed. It took 40 minutes total. When it was done, Crow stood. He didn't offer his hand to Wyatt. He looked briefly at Clara, one final measuring look, and then he walked out of the room without speaking again. Aldridge followed. Martin began gathering papers. The room was suddenly very quiet. Wyatt sat for a moment without moving. Clara stayed beside him. It's done, Martin said gently. The title is secure. The claim is gone. He paused. Your father's land is your land. As it always was. Wyatt put his hands on the table. He looked at them. He looked at the settlement document that Martin had just signed and sealed. He looked at the wall. He looked like a man who had been holding a weight for so long that the absences of it had not yet registered as real. Clara reached across the table and put her hand over his. She didn't say anything. He turned his hand over and held hers. Just for a moment. Just long enough for it to be real. Then Martin was speaking again. About the inspection proceeding as formality now. About Reed arriving tomorrow as scheduled, and the site visit being a straightforward confirmation, and the world moved forward as it always did. Practical and immediate, and requiring things of people, whether or not they were ready. Clara took her hand back. She picked up her bag. Let's go home, she said. Wyatt stood. He held the door for Martin, who went ahead with his papers and his quiet professional satisfaction. Then Wyatt held the door for Clara. She walked through it. He came out behind her, and they stood in the courthouse doorway with the whole flat Texas morning ahead of them. And the sun was high and bright, and the street was full of ordinary life that had gone on being ordinary while extraordinary things happened inside that room. The inspection is tomorrow, Clara said. Yes, Wyatt said. Reed will be thorough, he will. We're ready, Clara said. Wyatt looked at, he said. 2 words. Simple. But they carried the whole weight of 23 days, the records and the archive and the fence line and the midnight lantern and the kitchen table and the letter in the desk drawer and every conversation that had started as strategy and turned into something neither of them had names for yet. Clara nodded. She walked toward the wagon. Wyatt fell into step beside her, and they went home to prepare for the last day. Samuel Reed arrived at Callahan Creek Ranch at 8 o'clock the following morning in a clean coat and with a leather satchel that Clara recognized immediately as the kind carried by a man who took his work seriously. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, compact and methodical, with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had conducted enough inspections to know that rushing produced errors and errors produced problems he'd have to fix later. He shook Wyatt's hand. He shook Clara's hand. He looked at both of them with the clear, neutral attention of a man who had been briefed on the case history and was here to see what the evidence actually said. Mrs. Callahan, he said, I understand you assembled the documentary evidence file. I did, Clara said. I read it last night, Reed said. All of it. He paused, and something in his expression shifted just slightly, but she caught it. The summary document at the front was particularly clear. It helped me understand the sequence before I read the individual records. That was the intention, Clara said. Reed looked at her for one more moment, the look of a man recalibrating something, and then turned to Wyatt. I'd like to begin with the physical intersection of the property. Boundary lines, livestock, water systems, structural condition. Then we'll move to the records review. I expect to be done by early afternoon. Whenever you're ready, Wyatt said. They spent the morning walking the ranch. Clara stayed close, but not underfoot, present enough to answer questions, far enough back to let Reed form his own impressions without feeling managed. She watched him work. He checked the fence line with a systematic attention that missed nothing, running his hand along wire, testing post stability, noting repair work, and assessing how recent it was. He counted cattle in each pasture. He inspected the water trough system, the barn structure, the storage buildings. He wrote in his notebook continuously, small precise notes that he did not share with anyone. Wyatt walked beside him and answered every question directly. Clara had spent an evening preparing him for this, not coaching him on what to say, but working through the ranch history with him until he could give Reed the picture of every improvement made since his father's death without consulting notes. Wyatt had not needed much preparation. He knew this land better than he knew most things. He just needed to know that what he knew was enough. It was. Reed asked about the water trough system, and Wyatt explained the expansion he'd done in 1881, the additional capacity added for the south pasture herd, the drainage improvement that had prevented the flooding problem from the year before. Reed made notes. He asked about the barn roof repair. He asked about the well deepening. For every question, Wyatt had a complete, accurate, unhesitating answer. 2 hours in, they reached the eastern boundary. Clara felt the particular quality of attention shift around her when they got there, not dramatically, but she felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather arrives. This was the contested ground. This was where the Harper claim had been aimed. The creek was visible from the fence line, 23 feet west of where the 1849 survey had placed the tributary. Reed looked at the creek. He looked at the fence line. He took out a map, the county survey map, the current one, and compared it to a document he pulled from his satchel. Clara recognized it, the 1863 flood record, with the surveyor's coordinate markings. He stood there for a long moment, looking between the map and the document and the actual ground. The flood shift, he said. Documented in the county archive, Clara said. The certified copy is in the evidence file, tab 3. I saw it, Reed said. He looked at the creek. The Harper survey's eastern boundary anchor point. The tributary is 23 feet west of where their 1849 document placed it. Yes, Clara said. Which means the Harper survey's boundary, as literally described, doesn't intersect with this property at all in its current geographic configuration. That is our position, Clara said, and the position supported by the 1871 county ruling on fixed coordinate survey interpretation. Reed made a note. He put the map away. He looked at Wyatt. Your fence line, he said, is consistent with the 1851 Callahan survey coordinates. It always has been, Wyatt said. Reed nodded once. He made another note, and Clara let herself breathe just slightly, just enough to acknowledge that the most critical point of the inspection had just passed, and passed cleanly. They went back to the house for the records review. This was Clara's territory, and she knew it. She had the evidence file open on the table before Reed sat down, tabbed and indexed, with the summary document on top. She had the original ledgers organized in chronological order to the left. She had the livestock registration records, the supply account history, the deed chain, all of it accessible and clearly marked. Reed threw it with endosystocane methodical attention he'd applied to the physical inspection. He asked questions. Clara answered them. Sometimes Wyatt answered them. Sometimes they answered together, Clara providing the documentary reference, Wyatt providing the operational context that gave the document its meaning. An hour in, Reed reached the 1878 livestock registration gap. Clara had been waiting for it. The 1878 annual registration shows incomplete, Reed said. He was looking at the county livestock record, not at Clara or Wyatt. The following year's filing, tab 9, shows the combined registration for both 1878 and 1879, Clara said. The county clerk accepted it with a notation on the bottom of the second page. The explanation for the missed filing is in the cover note, written by Wyatt's father. Reed turned to tab 9. He read the combined filing. He read the clerk's acceptance notation. He read the cover note, Hale Callahan's handwriting, older than Wyatt's, explaining without self-pity that the previous year had been difficult and the filing had been missed. And here was the complete record for both years. Reed was quiet for a moment. His father was ill, Wyatt said. Quietly. Not as an excuse, as a fact. I can see that from the note, Reed said. He made a notation in his book. The cure was within the allowed filing period. Yes, Clara said, and the county clerk accepted it without condition. Yes. Reed moved on. He did not come back to the 1,878 gap. They finished the records review just after noon. Reed closed his notebook and put it in his satchel and sat for a moment looking at the evidence file with the expression of a man completing a calculation. I have everything I need for my report, he said. When will it be filed? Wyatt said. End of this week, Reed said. The district land office will have the formal confirmation within 10 days. He paused. He looked at both of them, Wyatt first, then Clara. I don't generally comment on my findings before the formal report is filed. But I will tell you that everything I've seen today is consistent with an actively managed, continuously maintained ranch household that meets the county standard in full. He paused again. I've been doing this work for 22 years. This is one of the most thoroughly documented property files I've reviewed. He picked up his satchel. He stood. Thank you both for your time, he said. Clara walked him to the door. She watched him ride down the main path toward the gate. She stood on the porch until he was through the gate and on the road. Then she turned around and went back inside. Wyatt was still at the table. He had both hands flat on the surface. He was looking at the evidence file, at the months of his father's record, and 2 weeks of her work, and everything that had been built and protected and fought for, and his face held an expression that Clara had no name for and did not try to name. She sat down across from him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. It's over, Wyatt said. Almost, Clara said. 10 days for the formal confirmation. But it's over, he said. She looked at him. Yes, she said. It's over. He closed his eyes, just for a second. Just long enough for something to move through him that had been waiting a very long time to move. Then he opened them and looked at her. Clara, he said. Don't, she said. He stopped. Don't thank me again, she said. We've been through that. That's not what I was going to say, he said. She looked at him. He reached across the table. He picked up the evidence file and set it aside. Then he reached into the ledger stack, into the very bottom of it, where things that had been on the table since before she arrived had settled, and he pulled out a document she recognized immediately. The marriage agreement. The one they'd signed at the county registrar's office on the evening of the first day. The temporary arrangement, the practical contract, the thing that had started all of this. He set it on the table between them. Clara looked at it. Then at him. I've been thinking about what comes next, Wyatt said. 10 days, Clara said carefully. The formal confirmation. After the formal confirmation, he said. She held his gaze. The arrangement we made, he said, was for 6 months. To get through the inspection. We're past this inspection. He looked at the document. This paper says we revisit the terms after the title is secured. Yes, Clara said. The title will be secured in 10 days. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. When he looked up at her, his gray eyes were direct and entirely unguarded in a way she had almost never seen from him, not because he was a closed person, but because he was careful. He did not open things he wasn't certain about. He was certain now. I don't want to revisit the terms, he said. I don't want to negotiate an end to this arrangement. I don't want to sit across from you in 10 days or 6 months and talk about what we both get in exchange for walking away cleanly. He paused. I want you to stay. Clara didn't move. Not for the ranch, he said. Not for the records or the household management or any practical reason. I want you to stay because... He stopped. He picked up the marriage agreement and looked at it for a moment. Because I came in from the barn 3 weeks ago and you were already at that table with the ledgers before I got downstairs, and something shifted. And it hasn't shifted back. and I don't want it to." Clara looked at him. Her throat was tight in a way she was managing carefully. "Wyatt," she said. "I know what this is," he said. "I know how it started. I know I asked a woman I'd never met to marry me in the first hour, and I know you did it for your own reasons that had nothing to do with me. And I know that's not the story people expect to turn into." He stopped again. He set the document down. "I'm not asking you to pretend it was something it wasn't. I'm asking you what it is now." Clara was quiet for a long moment. She thought about Fort Worth, about the bank letter and the closed doors, and the 8 months of being the woman whose family had failed. She thought about the newspaper clipping she'd carried until the ink faded. She thought about the first morning in this house when she'd come downstairs before dawn with her notebook and found that something about this particular problem, this man's problem, this land's problem had felt, for the first time in nearly a year, like something worth all of her. She thought about the fence line at midnight and the archive table and Aldridge's face in the moment he understood she'd already found everything. She thought about Pearl handing her certified documents with the quiet precision of a woman choosing whose side she was on. She thought about what Wyatt had said on the porch 10 days ago, the first night in 2 years I slept until dawn. And she knew without ceremony that the same had been true for her. She had not told him that. She was telling him now. "The night after we filed Martin's motion," she said, "I woke up at 2 in the morning, and I sat in the dark for a minute, trying to figure out what had woken me. And I realized nothing had. I'd just properly slept for the first time since Fort Worth." She paused. "I think I knew then." Wyatt looked at her. "Knew what?" "That this was not going to end at 6 months," she said. "That I wasn't going to want it to." The room was very quiet. Outside, somewhere, Ranger moved his tags, the familiar sound of him settling. "I'm not easy," Clara said. "I'll tell you that plainly. I have opinions about everything and I'll argue them, and I won't stop working when you think I should rest, and I'll reorganize things you thought were fine the way they were." "I know that," Wyatt said. She stopped. This was harder. The practical parts were easy. She could list her qualities and her faults with the same clear-eyed efficiency she brought to ledger columns. The other thing was harder. "I'm not good at being taken care of," she said. "I've spent 8 months being very certain that I didn't need anything from anyone. And I think some part of me is still Clara," Wyatt said. She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to need me," he said. "I'm asking you to want to stay." He paused. "There's a difference." She held his gaze. And the thing that had been moving toward the surface for 3 weeks arrived there, fully, quietly, without drama the way real things tended to arrive. Not with the force of revelation, but with the settled certainty of something that had always been true, and was only now being said. "I want to stay," she said. Wyatt picked up the marriage agreement. He looked at it once more. Then he walked to the fireplace and set it in the fire. Clara watched it catch. When he turned back to her, he crossed the room and stood in front of her, and she stood up from the chair, and they were the same height, almost exactly. And he looked at her the way he looked at things he had decided about, with his full attention and no performance. "Thank you," he said, "for coming here, for all of it." "You already thanked me," she said. "Not for this," he said. "Not for staying." She looked at him. "You haven't thanked me for that yet," she said. "I just decided." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. The smile she had been watching arrive in pieces for 3 weeks, the one that appeared briefly and disappeared before it fully formed, arrived now and stayed. She had not seen him smile fully before. It changed his face in a way that was significant and that she intended to remember. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw. He covered it with his own. They stood like that for a moment, just stood, nothing more, in the house that had started as a legal arrangement and become something that did not have a convenient name. Then Ranger barked outside, the specific bark he used for Hector's arrival, and the world moved back in with its practical requirements, and Wyatt called through the window that he'd be out in a moment. And Clara went to put the kettle on, because Hector always drank coffee when he came in from the South Line, and the ordinary life of the ranch resumed around them as it always did. But something had changed in the room, in the house. in the particular quality of the silence between two people who had stopped negotiating the terms of their arrangement and started simply living inside it. The formal confirmation from the district land office arrived in 9 days, not 10. Martin Graves brought it himself, drove out to the ranch in his own buggy on a Tuesday morning with the sealed document in his satchel and something on his face that Clara had not seen there before: uncomplicated joy. He had carried this case for 2 years, and before him his client's father had carried it longer, and it was done now, permanently and completely, in the only way that mattered. He set the confirmation on the kitchen table. Wyatt read it. Clara read it over his shoulder. The language was formal and dry, and the most consequential thing either of them had touched in weeks. Callahan Creek Ranch. Title confirmed. Unencumbered. All competing claims resolved. Permanent. Wyatt put the document down. He looked at Martin. "It's done," Martin said. "It's done," Wyatt said. Martin stayed for coffee. He talked about the county, about the news that Crow had quietly listed his eastern properties for sale, a man reducing his footprint before further scrutiny arrived about Tommy Briggs, who had found legitimate work at the Dunbar place where Hector had put in a word, about Pearl, who had been formally recognized by the county clerk's office for her contributions to an active land case, which was the kind of recognition that meant nothing in salary and everything in principle. When Martin left, Wyatt and Clara stood on the porch and watched the buggy go down the road, and Ranger sat between their feet, and the ranch spread out around them in all directions: the cattle in the south pasture, the repaired fence line, the barn with its reinforced roof, the well that went deeper than it used to, the kitchen where the kettle was still warm, the table where two people had spent 3 weeks building something from necessity and found that what they'd built was real. "I want to show you something," Wyatt said. He went inside and came back with a photograph, old, slightly faded, the kind that cost something to have made and so was only taken at significant moments. Two people standing in front of a much younger version of the same house. A man and a woman, both upright, both looking at the camera with the serious expression that photographs required. "My parents," Wyatt said, "the year they were married." Clara looked at it. She could see Wyatt in his father, the posture, the quality of stillness, and something in the woman beside him, not her face, but the way she stood, the particular uprightness of someone who had chosen to be exactly where they were. "She ran the books," Clara said. "For 22 years, Wyatt said. Until she couldn't anymore." Clara looked at the photograph for a moment longer. Then she handed it back. "We should frame it," she said. "Put it somewhere it can be seen." Wyatt looked at her. "This is their house too," Clara said simply. He looked at the photograph. Then at her. Then he nodded, once, with the complete and settled certainty of a man who understood what had just been said and what it meant. 3 weeks earlier, Clara Whitfield had stepped off a supply wagon in a dusty frontier town with a worn suitcase and a newspaper clipping, and the last piece of pride she refused to surrender. She had come looking for steady wages and found something she had not known to look for: not rescue, not charity, not the chance that people offered as condescension, dressed in kindness. She had found a problem worthy of everything she was. She had found a man who did not ask her to be smaller than she was. She had found a house that needed the same thing she needed: someone who would plant their feet and refuse to let go. And she had found, in the process of saving someone else's home, that she had built one of her own. Hector came in from the south line at midday, his nephew behind him, and they ate at the long kitchen table, all 4 of them, with Ranger under the table and the confirmations document still on the sideboard, and the afternoon work waiting as it always did. Hector raised his coffee cup at some point and said, "To the Callahan Ranch," and they drank to it without ceremony, because ceremony was not what this table was for. After Hector left, Clara went back to the account ledger. There was always something to update, something to reconcile, some column that needed closing, and Wyatt went out to the barn. And the afternoon moved the way afternoons moved on a working ranch, with purpose and without fanfare. An hour later, Wyatt came back inside. He stood in the kitchen doorway. Clara looked up. "The south water line needs adjusting before winter," he said. I'll need to order additional pipe from the Red Hollow store. Can you add it to the supply list? Clara said. I'm placing an order Thursday. The account is balanced, she said. I reconciled it this morning. He looked at her for a moment. Of course you did. She looked back at her ledger. He did not leave the doorway. Wyatt, she said, without looking up. Yes, you're going to stand there until I acknowledge something, and I'd rather you just say it. A pause. Then I was just thinking that my father was right. She looked up. The most important thing on a ranch, Wyatt said, is the person who keeps everything from falling apart while you're looking the other direction. He held her gaze. He was right about that. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Go fix the south water line, she said. He almost smiled. He went. She turned back to the ledger. The afternoon light was good and the account column was clean, and the house around her was full of the sounds of a working ranch in the hours when the work never entirely stopped, and Clara Whitfield, Clara Callahan, dipped her pen and kept going. In the home she had built with her own 2 hands, beside the man who had finally learned to look in the right direction. She had arrived with nothing but a suitcase, a clipping, and the last piece of pride she refused to surrender. She had built everything else herself, and that was exactly how she wanted it.